Hello and welcome to History Walks with Daisy the Beagle and me, Dr. Charlie Rosier. Today we're at Framlingham Castle, which you can see behind me. Framlingham is a small town about half an hour north of Ipswich in Suffolk. It's got a market every Tuesday and Saturday and it's famous for its excellent schools. It's also extremely sunny today, which is why I've got my sunglasses on. The singer Ed Sheeran spent a period of his childhood and youth in Framlingham, and he wrote a song in 2017 called Castle on the Hill, which is about Framlingham Castle. The castle itself appears at the end of that video. There's been a castle at Framlingham since at least the middle of the 12th century, possibly earlier, but this version of the castle dates to after the 1170s. It's a scheduled ancient monument, a Grade 1 listed building, and the castle is now owned and managed by English Heritage. You can visit if you pay a small fee. Today we're going to be learning about some disputed noble succession, some rebellions against English kings, and two of the most powerful women in English medieval history. The English Heritage Survey by Magnus Alexander argues that Framlingham was probably at the centre of a multiple estate portion of land in the pre-conquest period. So, kind of one estate of many all connected together. Framlingham is mentioned in the Domesday book, compiled in 1086. The land is mostly owned by HUGH, Earl of Chester, and by Roger BIGOD, who's Sheriff of Suffolk, operating on HUGH's behalf, and the BIGOD family were to have a long association with Framlingham during the earlier part of its history. The church also owns many lands around Framlingham at 1086 in the Domesday book. So here we are outside the main castle complex, looking at a late 12th century version of Framlingham Castle. The earliest record to Framlingham Castle is 1148, but there may have been a structure here since the Anglo-Norman period after the Norman conquest. HUGH BIGOD was made Earl of Norfolk in 1140, so it may be that the first version of Framlingham Castle was constructed in the wake of that appointment. HUGH had other castles nearby in Suffolk and East Anglia, like one at Bungay and one at Bolton, which is now modern day Felixstowe. So it could be that the castle was built in collaboration with that. A castle here was demolished in the 1170s. In 1173, King Henry II faced a rebellion of three of his sons. Henry, who was the oldest, he was called Henry the Young King, Richard, who would become king, and John, who would also become king after him. After that rebellion in the 1170s, Alnoth, King Henry II's engineer, was sent to destroy the first version of Framlingham Castle, whatever it was. We don't know what it looked like, we roughly know it was probably in the same place, so we'll probably never know. Unfortunately, with that period of history, sometimes we have to say that we just will not know the answer to those kinds of questions. Daisy, come here, come here, come here. Daisy, Daisy, come here. Good girl, good girl, good girl. When HUGH BIGOD died in 1177, Henry II refused to give Framlingham to his son Roger because of HUGH's role in the 1173 rebellion. But by 1189, Richard succeeded to the kingship and gave Framlingham to Roger. By 1213, John was king and stayed at Framlingham Castle, so the new building must have been complete by this point. In 1215, the barons rebelled against John, and he travelled to Framlingham, which surrendered quickly. Historian Rob Lydiard has shown that the garrison at that time consisted of 26 knights, 20 sergeants, 7 crossbowmen, and a priest. Framlingham was designed with no inner keep, but instead 13 open back towers that you can see here. The design also included an inner court labelled A on the map, and an outer court labelled B down to the hill, and a bailey labelled C on the map outside the existing walls. There would have been a variety of buildings within this complex, but they've now been lost. One of the most important families in the history of Framlingham, the BROTHERTON families. So in 1312, Framlingham Castle was granted to Edward II's half-brother Thomas de Brotherton, who both had been sons of Edward I. Thomas de Brotherton was made Earl of Norfolk, and Framlingham Castle has a long association with the Earls of Norfolk. When Thomas de Brotherton died, His daughter Margaret, who was born at Framlingham in around 1320, inherited the Earl of Norfolk title, and she styled herself as Countess of Norfolk. She was married to John Seagrave, but in 1350 she journeyed to Rome to plead to the Pope so that she could be divorced from that man, because she married him when she was 15 and she argued that wasn't a true marriage. This was rejected, but John died in 1353 anyway, so Margaret was free to marry, and she remarried to Walter Moni. Margaret's story highlights the wealth that a very prominent noble family could have during her lifetime. Margaret inherited the Brotherton estates, the Seagrave lands, and some of the Moni lands. So by 1270, going back a bit, there are records of a great park of 600 acres at Framlingham and a mere, and essentially a large income. This is illustrated if we study the food that Margaret and her companions were eating. In 1385-6, Margaret's household consumed over 70,000 loaves of bread, 697 carcasses of mutton, so that's more than 2 a day, 24 pounds of saffron, and 28,000 gallons of ale. In later life, Margaret used the title Earl Marshal, which her father had used before her, although it was really only an official title, never actually acted upon. And Margaret died in 1399, aged around 80, and by the time she died, she'd been elected to the role of Duchess of Norfolk, so that's a promotion from her previous role as Countess. And she's buried at Greyfriars in London. Another of the families associated with Framlingham Castle is the Howard family. In 1476, Framlingham passed to John Howard, who was made the new Duke of Norfolk, and, as we've heard before, if you become Duke of Norfolk, you usually get Framlingham Castle. John embarked on a brick rebuilding of the castle, inserting all of the dramatic chimneys and fireplaces that you can see in the modern castle. And John also installed the Howard crest on the gatehouse. In 1547, Thomas Howard, who was then Duke of Norfolk, was arrested for supporting the case of Mary, who hoped to inherit from her father, Henry VIII. But Henry VIII died before Thomas could be executed, and when Edward VI succeeded, he gave Framlingham to his sister, Mary. When Edward died in turn, in 1553, Mary pressed her claim to be Queen of England. She'd been the daughter of Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and Mary was a staunch Catholic, which meant that many people opposed her rule. She set up camp in Framlingham Castle and began to attract followers. By the 12th of July, most of the nobles of England were supporting her case. By the 19th of July, 1553, the Privy Council voted unanimously to declare Mary as the new Queen of England in her own right at Framlingham Castle. But what was good for Mary was bad for Framlingham Castle, because it meant that she spent almost none of the rest of her time in Framlingham Castle, meaning that by the end of the 16th century, the place needed a refit and a rebuilding. What's this? This is how you get to listen to history. Good girl, Daisy. In 1635, Framlingham Castle was bought by lawyer and philanthropist Robert Hitcham. He died a year later in 1636, and he left the castle to Pembroke College, Cambridge, so that it would be used as a workhouse after the new 1601 Poor Law. The workhouse was built inside the grounds of the castle, and it forms part of the main standing building that you can see behind Daisy here, in the modern day courtyard. From this point onwards, the story of Framlingham Castle is largely one of neglect and decline, and you can see the state the castle was in the early 19th century in this engraving by Henry Davy. We hope you enjoyed watching our visit to Framlingham Castle. More information on where Framlingham Castle is and how you can visit is given below the video. If you liked the video, please leave us a comment, give us a like and subscribe for more updates on our next videos. Follow us on social media and we look forward to seeing you soon on another History Walk with Daisy the Beagle.